Spring training has been underway for a couple of weeks as the Mets are getting ready for a season that is highly anticipated by their fans. So let's check in on the team's spring training progress with the host of the Subway to Shea podcast. It's my guy, Anthony Rivera, who joins me now. Anthony, long time no speak. First time I'm talking to you in 2025. I know this is a highly anticipated season. I feel like the last time I talked to you was shortly after Juan Soto signed with the Mets. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. I'm just happy that baseball is back. It felt like we've had a long year without many gaps, and that's a good thing for baseball.
That is a good thing for baseball. Makes it feel continuous, even though the offseason has felt just a little bit long, but maybe that's the excitement for us to get back to some baseball. And we're almost there. And Kodai Senga, he's almost back. He's set to make his first spring training start in two locations, pitching in both a minor league and major league setting. What do you make of this unconventional approach here, and what should Mets fans look for in his return to the mound here in spring training?
I am okay with however it is that they are going to get Kodai Senga back up and running for a full entire season. We all know that he has to be held with kid gloves and that at most we're probably going to see a six-man rotation once everyone seems to be healthy, but this is a very, very important start. I know it's only going to be one inning on the field and then they're going to go to the backfield for a couple of other innings, but this is very important, and especially the days after, to see how he heals following this start. We really need Kodai Senga to anchor this rotation and be the lead here, be the ace of this staff, because we're already down Sean Manaea and Frankie Montas. And without those two, we're really going to have to rely a lot on what Kodai Senga does, what David Peterson does, and now with the new starter in Clay Holmes and what he does.
Yeah, it's going to be very, very important to get Senga back into the fold, and I'm very excited to see what he can do, how he can help the team coming back, hopefully healthy as well. Now, I want to talk to you about some other pitchers. We're going to go to some young pitchers. Blade Tidwell. Woo! He made headlines. Immaculate inning in his second spring training start. How significant is this for his development, Anthony? And when do you see him actually making an impact in the Mets rotation or bullpen this season?
I think you would see him more in the bullpen, but if the rotation, these pitchers keep getting hurt, not giving us innings, we may see him come up. But I think at first, at the very least, we might see Brandon Sproat before him. Blade Tidwell looked great in his second outing. He had a tough first one. This outing looked a whole lot better. And like you mentioned, the immaculate inning that he had, very impressive to see. He's got impressive stuff, and he's one of the top two Mets pitching prospects that there is right now. And the Mets really need to start building from within when it comes to starting pitchers. We've seen it in the past where you sign these free agents, they don't last long. You give them a whole lot of money to pitch, less than 4 or 5 innings. They got to stop that, and they have to grow this depth in the minor leagues and with these prospects. And I think the Mets are doing a good job with guys like Blade Tidwell. You got Brandon Sproat, you got Jonah Tong as well, and even Dom Hamill, who pitched today.
Yeah, so they got some arms coming on the way, and that's where I wanted to go next. And I was glad you mentioned Brandon Sproat because I have a cousin, Monique. She's a big Mets fan, and she is on the Brandon Sproat bandwagon, I guess you could say. I was going to say train, hype train, bandwagon, whatever you want to call it there, Anthony. But the Mets, they're hoping that Sproat is the first of many promising young arms to develop into a key contributor. So you got Sproat, who you mentioned. You got Tidwell. There are others in the pipeline. You mentioned Jonah Tong as well, too. How encouraged should Mets fans be about the future of the team's pitching depth as they go forward, especially what they've seen from young arms thus far here in spring training?
From the guys that they have, it's very impressive to see how far they've come. About like we mentioned, the big four: Sproat, Tidwell, Dom Hamill, Jonah Tong. There's still a lot of work to be done when it comes to building this pitching depth in the minor leagues. But we're off to a good start here, and it's great to see. And that's a reason why I think that David Stearns does not sign these long-term deals. If he's going to sign a long-term deal, it's for someone that is young. We saw with Yamamoto, he was 26 years old. The Mets would have gave him a long-term deal. And maybe this is something that happens in the future when these prospects come up. Now, we know prospects are a dime a dozen. We know that it may work, it may not work out. We've seen Generation K. We've seen how fast the DeGrom, Harvey, Matz and Syndergaard, how well they pitch, but then how quickly they fall. So nothing is guaranteed. But this is the model that the Mets really need to hook onto and to start building a pitching depth from within instead of spending so much money on the outside.
Yeah, and it seems like it could be a good model to follow. If you get a couple of these guys to hit, even if they're number 2 starters, it can bode extremely well for your franchise. Even if they're a number 3 starter, right? Just hitting, in fact,
Yeah.
of being rotation pieces that you can trust and rely upon. Now, speaking of relying upon, Juan Soto, he's been who he thought he's been. He's wasted no time in making an impact this spring. He already showcased his power with multiple home runs. How has he looked in camp in your eyes, and how do you think his presence can help elevate Pete Alonso and also the rest of this Mets lineup?
Is as advertised the best terminology to use for this? I mean, he's looked great, right? Right off the bat, hit a 2-run home run in his first at bat. He had another monster shot the other day, and I just think not only for Pete Alonso and the rest of this lineup, I think this entire team, as soon as he entered the door for spring training, the aura that he brings with him, whether it was just him hanging out and talking with his teammates, the giving the car to Brett Beatty, I think that he is a culture changer, and that's what this team, got started last season when they, improved and played well with Francisco Lindor at the charge. You now add a all-star, almost, in the future could be a Hall of Fame type player. He's definitely a top 5, top 6 player in all of Major League Baseball. But what he brings not only to this lineup, we saw what he did with the Yankees last season. And to be honest, I think that this Mets lineup is better than the Yankees lineup last year. Outside of Aaron Judge and Juan Soto, you could talk about Giancarlo Stanton as well, but that was mostly towards the playoffs. I think that this lineup is pretty complete to me, and I think Juan Soto is going to be very integral in that.
All right, got some excitement about the Mets lineup, and Yankee fans, when they hear those comments, they're not going to be happy about that. You know that, Anthony. You know there's going to be a very interesting point of debate. We'll see whose lineup is better this season. But I got to ask you this before we wrap. From what you've seen thus far, what are the biggest takeaways from Mets spring training, right? I know it's just spring training, but are there any under-the-radar players who have impressed you here? What's your biggest takeaways that you've seen through the first couple of weeks of spring training?
Obviously, what we talked about, Juan Soto bringing his aura and bringing that culture to the team. But if you want to talk about players, I know it's only spring, and I know he's played well in the minor leagues, but Brett Beatty is pretty much playing for his life here, right? I mean, he lost his third base job to Mark Vientos, and now he comes into spring looking to kind of solidify that final spot on the roster against a Luis Angel Acuna, who also is playing for that final spot after Nick Madrigal fractured his shoulder. This is a big opportunity for both of these players, and this is probably the only spot that's going to be, debated of who's going to make the roster. And Brett Beatty has pretty much shown out on offense and pretty much on defense as well. So it's going to be good to see if he can make the roster. And then on the pitching side, for me, it's been Clay Holmes. And I know it's just spring. I know they're not facing the elite, but what we've seen from Clay Holmes, who's making that transition, who came into spring training early and was already throwing, 3 innings, I think that that's been huge. And the Mets really need him to be that third guy on the rotation right now while Sean Manaea is out. He's going to be very, like we mentioned, Kodai Senga is important. Clay Holmes, who's making that transition to being a reliever and closer to now being a starter, just as equally important.
Yeah, Clay Holmes is going to be an important piece for this Mets rotation, especially early on in the innings that he can give them. So we'll see how that all shakes out. That is Anthony Rivera, host of the Subway to Shea podcast. Check him out there. Excuse me. Got something caught there, but check him out there. Anthony, this is the first of many times we'll be talking this season. A lot of more Mets baseball to talk. Good talking to you, and we will do this again soon.
Absolutely, Dexter. I can't wait.